So today we're going to think a little bit about the meaning of Yom Kippur from the perspective of the Kabbalah, and more specifically, not more specifically, but also hopefully if we have time, we'll try to show how those same themes of Yom Kippur are actually reflected in the holiday that follows, the holiday of Sukot. Because as we mentioned in the past, the one way to view the holidays of Tishrei, the holidays of the seventh month, the seventh month on the Hebrew calendar, but Tishrei is the seventh month when you count the months, but it's the beginning of the year. So if you want to think about the holidays in the beginning of the year, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukot, Simchat Torah, they're really essentially four holidays. One way to look at it is that there are four holidays and each one has another theme. Rosh Hashanah is the New Year. Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement. Sukkot is the holiday when we celebrate the harvest, or really the ingathering of the harvest. And we sit in the huts to commemorate the fact that we were sat in the hut when we left Egypt. And then Shmini Atzeret is the final day of all the holidays. It becomes also Simchat Torah, the celebration of the conclusion of the Torah. But if you look at it on one level, superficially, it's four distinct holidays. However, if you drill down a little bit, then you get to the realization, at least from the perspective of the Kabbalah, that it's not four distinct holidays. In fact, essentially it's the same theme. And each holiday is another step in the process of experiencing that essential theme, and experiencing and internalizing and crystallizing it and making it real in our life. So there is a certain level of awareness or truth that we want to achieve during the holidays. And the reason why we have all these days lined up is because it does take time to tap into it, to access it. And then once accessing it itself is not enough, we also have to make it real in our life. And that's why we have all the holidays. So we're not going to have time to discuss all the holidays in 45 minutes, but I do want to do a little bit of Yom Kippur and how the concept of Yom Kippur is reflected in Sukot. That starts only 4 days later. 4 days later, the 4 days is not a mistake. 4 days, it's actually the 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukot. It's called, really the day after Sukkot, Yom Kippur, is called in the code of law, God's name, B'Shem Hashem. Why is it called God's name? Because God's name has 4 letters, Yud He Vav He, and the 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, there are also 4 days. So those 4 days correspond to the 4, those 4 days correspond to the 4 letters of God's name. And what that means in simple English is we also have 4 letters of God's name in our soul. In other words, to allow Yom Kippur to permeate all the parts of our soul, that's the preparation for Sukkot. So in other words, this connection between Yom Kippur and Sukkot has to go through those 4 days, because it's the idea of crystallizing what we achieve on Yom Kippur and making it tangible within Sukkot. So that is sort of by way of introduction. So I guess we have to spend a few minutes talking about Yom Kippur, and then we'll try to talk about Sukkot and what they have in common and how they relate. So, what's the good place to begin? On the simple level, Yom Kippur is a day of, as its name says, it's the Day of Atonement. But the question is, why do we need a Day of Atonement? Every day, if you do Teshuva, Hashem will accept your Teshuva. So what does this mean? That there's one day on the calendar that we say this day is designated for Teshuva. Teshuva you can do every day of the year. That's one question. So what this leads us to say is that the Teshuva of Yom Kippur is different than the Teshuva of the whole year. And we have to define, how does that work? What does it mean to return to God all year? And what does it mean to return to God of Yom Kippur? What does it mean atonement a whole year? And what does it mean atonement on Yom Kippur? So the way we get into this question is we want to introduce another Talmudic dispute. So there is a dispute between Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim and the sages. So Rabbi Yossi is one individual sage, and then the majority of the sages. So Rabbi Yossi is actually very appealing. Rabbi Yossi says that regardless if one does teshuva, regardless if one experiences an internal transformation, regardless if I do teshuva or not, Yom Kippur atones. That would be wonderful. Be great. In the language of Rabbi Yossi, Itzumoi shel Yom Mechaper, the essence of the day atones. So you don't have to do anything. You don't have to experience any feelings of closeness to God. You don't have to return to God. All you have to do is the way you wake up, and it's Yom Kippur, the day on the calendar strikes, and you are forgiven. That's Rabbi Yossi. Sages, unfortunately for us, because the law follows the sages say as follows. This is a very interesting statement. They say the essence of Yom Kippur atones for those who do teshuva. Okay, so you can't just treat Yom Kippur like any other day, but you have to actually experience something on Yom Kippur to allow for Yom Kippur to atone. Okay, so let's analyze this statement. The essence of the day atones for those who do teshuva. 1 second. If the person is doing teshuva, then teshuva atones. What does it mean, the essence of the day? In other words, what does Yom Kippur add on the regular level of teshuva? It sounds like the sages are saying, if you do teshuva, then you will tap into the essence of the day, and the essence of the day leads to a higher level of teshuva. So this is all introduction to explain to us that Yom Kippur is more than just returning to God, say, God, I feel bad, I was distracted, I was not aware, I didn't do exactly what I should have done, now I'm going to recommit to living on the right path. That's teshuva, that works all year. You don't need Yom Kippur for that. What does Yom Kippur do? So from the Kabbalistic perspective, what Yom Kippur does, and again, we need to do teshuva to access that, but this is really what Yom Kippur does. Yom Kippur is the time when the essence of the soul of the Jew is available, could be felt. In other words, we have a soul. The soul has many levels. Most of the year, we're in touch with our conscious soul. Our conscious soul is the way we think and the way we feel. But above the conscious soul, there's they call it subconscious, but we're going to really call it, it's higher than the conscious. There's the essence of the soul, which we don't always feel. And the essence of the soul is interesting. The essence of the soul is always connected to God. So even if I am disconnected from God in the way I think or the way I feel, but the essence of my soul is always connected to God. And if I can tap into the essence of my soul, then that's where atonement comes from. And the simple example is that if, let's say your child does something wrong and you're very upset, now they want to return, they want to correct their mistake. So what could they do? So one path is they simply correct the mistake. So if they color it on the wall, so if they could clean the coloring on the wall, now they corrected their mistake. That's one path. Another path is if, for whatever reason, what you feel, for whatever reason, you feel the essence of that person's soul, the forgiveness will happen automatically. And the example is as follows. The example is you tell your child, don't touch the car. And the child takes the car keys and drives and gets into an accident. And the car is totaled, but thank God your child is okay. So you're driving over to see what happened. And you're very, very upset because your child didn't listen to you and your child got into trouble. Then when you get to the scene of the accident and you see what happened, that it's a miracle that your child wasn't hurt. So because of that scene, all of a sudden you feel love for your child because you feel that their life was at stake, their life was endangered. And then that essential bond that we discussed in the past, that essential bond to your child is felt, and then you don't care about the car anymore. So in other words, if Yom Kippur is about touching the place in our soul where the sin doesn't really matter. And that's why the atonement comes about. Not only because we corrected our ways, but the atonement happens because we touch the place of our soul where in that part of our soul, the relationship with God is essential and it's unchanging and it cannot be affected by anything we do. Now, the question is, how do I touch that part of my soul? How do I reveal that part of my soul? And that's a disagreement between Rabbi Yossi and the sages. And Rabbi Yossi says it happens automatically. The sages say, no, no, no. You actually have to work, and you have to sort of peel away at the external layers. You have to return to God. You have to meditate. You have to focus. You have to say, you have to regret the past. You have to accept for the future. You have to realign yourself. But when you realign yourself, what is achieving the atonement? Not the fact that you corrected the mistake you made. It's not that I colored on the wall and now I'm correcting the color and now I'm cleaning the wall. It's not that I'm correcting the mistake, because in that level, the mistake is real and the correction takes it away, but the sin is still there. Yom Kippur, what Yom Kippur does, it touches the place of the soul where sin doesn't really matter, because sin doesn't get in the way, because the essence of the Jew and the essence of God are one. So that is really Yom Kippur in a nutshell from the perspective of the Kabbalah, which explains why on Yom Kippur it's the only day of the year that there are 5 prayers. There's 5 prayers. Every day there are 3, morning, afternoon, evening. If it's or really we start at night, so it's evening, morning, and afternoon. That's a regular day. If it's Shabbat or a holiday, we add an extra prayer called Musaf, the additional prayer. So in the morning, after we read the Torah, we add another prayer to commemorate the additional offerings offered in the temple, and that is the Musaf prayer. Yom Kippur is the only day on the calendar where we have the 5th prayer, that after the evening service and the morning service and the additional service, the Musaf, and the afternoon service of Yom Kippur, we add an additional service called Ne'ilah. Ne'ilah literally means the closing of the gates. So there are different interpretations what it means. Why do we call this prayer the closing of the gates? But the bottom line is there are 5 prayers. Say the Kabbalists that there are 5 levels of the soul. And the 5th level of the soul is the essence of the soul. So the conscious soul is really first 3 levels. The 4th level is the will and the pleasure, sort of the overarching elements of the soul. And the essence of the soul is the 5th level. So when we say Yom Kippur, there are 5 prayers, it's not a technicality. It's because Yom Kippur, we can tap into the essence of the soul. And it doesn't only mean that we can tap into that essence of the soul on the 5th prayer, because the sages say it's a day that is obligated in 5 prayers, meaning the entire day is a day that it has 5 prayers. So you can access that essence of your soul anytime in the day. But of course, at the end of the day, the 5th prayer, that's where it's even more accessible. Okay, so that is the idea of Yom Kippur. In other words, Yom Kippur is about, if you want simple English, if you want to summarize everything we said in simple English, Yom Kippur is about touching the core of your soul. If you touch the core of your soul, then anything I did wrong sort of falls away, because insignificant, because you realize that's just a covering, that's just a layer that could be shed, but that does not affect the person you are. We discussed this in the past, that maybe it's also part of, maybe we'll discuss it in one of the upcoming Sundays. One of the biggest problem of sin is that when a person sins, the person then moves on to defining themselves by the sin. So if I always do something, I always lose my temper, for example. So then I say, I'm a person, I define myself, I say, I'm a person who loses his temper. And therefore, I don't try to be patient, because why should I? I'm not going to go against my nature, right? So again, the sin is defining ourselves by our actions. What is return? What is Teshuva? What is Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur is defining ourselves by who we really are. Who are we really? We really are the essence of our soul. The essence of our soul is called Yechida, the singular. It's bound up with God, the oneness of God, and therefore we're the happiest when we connect to God, because ultimately that's where we're comfortable and that's where we are at home. Okay, so that's in short what Yom Kippur is. Yom Kippur is not about fasting. Yeah, you have to fast to be able to access this part of your soul. Yom Kippur is not about praying. Yes, you have to pray to access that part of your soul. Yom Kippur is not about Teshuva. Yes, you have to do the Teshuva to get to what Yom Kippur is really about. But what's Yom Kippur really about? Yom Kippur is really about touching the essence of the soul. And that essence of the soul it triggers the atonement. Because again, when you feel that bond between parent and child, that essential bond, all sin becomes insignificant. What the child did is irrelevant when you touch that part of yourself and when you touch that part of the child. And that's Yom Kippur, and that's how atonement comes about. And that's why essentially it's not really a sad day. Some people think of Yom Kippur as a sad day. We come to shul, we say, oh, we did all these sins, continuously saying al chet, the confession, how bad we are, how terrible we are. That's a distraction. In other words, it's true, but if that's the only thing Yom Kippur is, then we're missing the boat. Yom Kippur is saying that my external layers are maybe not consistent with who I really am, but beneath the surface of Yom Kippur is really a great sense of joy. It's a really great sense of closeness, because what are we saying? We're saying Yom Kippur, there's atonement. Why is there atonement? Why does God forgive? God forgives because our soul and God are one. We're connected in an essential bond that cannot be shaken. And therefore, yes, we have to work, we have to clean up, we have to refocus, we have to get rid of the negative energy that we accumulated throughout the year. But that's a cleansing process, and what is left beneath that cleansing process is that deep connection to God. So Yom Kippur is not a sad day. Yom Kippur is it's a serious day. It's a spiritual day. It's a day when we fast, though it's a spiritual day because we're trying to touch our soul. In Judaism, throughout the year, we're trying to sanctify the body, right? It's not so much a focus on connecting to the soul, but sanctifying the body. Yom Kippur is not about sanctifying the body. It's about escaping the body, but to do what? To get to the essence of the soul. So that's Yom Kippur. It's easy. Now the question is, the rest of Sukot. So how does Sukot come about? Sukot is the joy. What are we celebrating? We're celebrating the harvest. But what does it mean spiritually? We're celebrating that bond that was experienced on Yom Kippur. Because we feel that deep connection with God on Yom Kippur, because we touched a part of ourselves that is one with God, because we feel that oneness with God, that's what we celebrate. We celebrate that connection, we celebrate that bond. So we're celebrating that bond on Sukkot. So that is the reason why Yom Kippur and Sukot are not two opposite emotions. They're really two sides of the same coin. If you can tap into the place where you feel one with God, then that relationship must be celebrated. When is it celebrated? On Yom Kippur, you're too busy trying to tap into that part of your soul. So you're not going to pull out the wine, and you're not going to pull out the good food, and you're not going to make a celebration because it's a day of focus and contemplation. But once you experience that relationship must be celebrated. And when is that celebrated? That's celebrated on Sukkot. So that's the big idea. And now we want to break down and see how so many of the themes of Yom Kippur are reflected in Sukkot. But if anybody has any questions on the big idea, please share and please ask, and then we'll continue. If not, we'll continue. So if anybody has anything to share, please go ahead. Otherwise, we continue. Okay, so where do you see the ideas of Yom Kippur reflected in Sukkot? In the law, in the ritual, in the mitzvot. So what was the essential, what was the most, in the times of the temple, what was the most important service of Yom Kippur? The most important service of Yom Kippur that was unique for Yom Kippur, that was not done any other time of the year, was that the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies. What is the Holy of Holies? The temple had at least two chambers. There was a courtyard, and then a chamber, and then an inner chamber. The innermost chamber was called Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies. And in the Holy of Holies, that's where the Ark stood in the first temple. The Ark stood in the Holy of Holies. And nobody was allowed to enter the Holy of Holies throughout the year. Only on Yom Kippur, once a year, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, would enter the Holy of Holies. What would he do in the Holy of Holies? In the Holy of Holies, he would offer incense. They would put the spices or the incense, the herbs, on a sort of a shovel that had coals, and you put the herbs on the fire, and the smoke comes up, and it releases a beautiful fragrance, and it fills the Holy of Holies with the smoke of the fragrance, the smoke of the incense. That's what he would do. And then he would leave. And he would do many other things throughout the day, but that was the most unique service of the day because that is something that was done only once a year. Now, we don't have a temple today, so we don't go into the Holy of Holies, but we do go into the Holy of Holies because, again, if we said that Yom Kippur is about touching the essence of my soul and expressing and revealing the essence of my soul, in other words, what does mean the essence of my soul? Okay, so what is my soul? My soul is who I am, and my soul is what I want. And what do I want? I want all kinds of things. But what's the essence? What does my essence want? My essence wants only to connect to God because my essence is one with God. So to access that part of self, we don't always have access to that part of self. That's the Holy of Holies. That's the innermost chamber. We don't always access that subconscious part of self. On Yom Kippur, when the high priest enters the Holy of Holies, that is a symbol that every person enters their own Holy of Holies, the essential chamber within their heart, which is the essence of their soul. So even though we don't have the high priest going into the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem on Temple Mountain, but like we say many times, that the temple also exists within the heart of every single person. And if we say that once a year your high priest enters your Holy of Holies, it means that once a year your conscious mind senses and feels the innermost chamber of your heart, which is your essence, which is your essential bond with God. So that's the high priest going in to the Holy of Holies. What happens in the Holy of Holies? We produce smoke. Now, in Hebrew, the word for smoke, and could also be, in other words, the Torah refers to the smoke that fills the Holy of Holies as anan, as cloud. Because a cloud is, you can't see, and the smoke sort of conceals, and there's a connection between the smoke and the cloud. And the verse says, V'kisa anan haktoret et hakaporet. The cloud of the ktoret, the cloud of the incense, will cover the kaporet, which is the covering of the ark. So we know there's a concept of cloud. Cloud is related to shade. Now, what is the essence? Let's pivot towards Sukkot. What is the essence of a sukkah? So the essence of the sukkah is you have to sit in a hut that has 4 walls, but the word sukkah comes from the word schach, which is the covering, which is that which produces shade. So on sukkahs we need shade. Say the Kabbalah. Now, why do we need shade? Because the Torah says the reason why we sit in the sukkah for 6 days, the reason why we sit in the sukkah for 7 days is the Torah says, again, the Torah does not always give the reasons for all the mitzvot. In fact, most mitzvot the Torah does not give a reason for. But when it comes to the mitzvah of Sukot, the Torah does give us a reason. And what does the Torah say? The Torah says you shall sit in the sukkah for 7 days because I sat the Jewish people in Sukkot when they left Egypt. We left Egypt, we went to the desert, and the desert is hot. So we had to build huts. God put us in huts. What were those huts? So there's 2 interpretations. One interpretation is that they actually built huts out of wood, out of branches, or whatever else they used. Another interpretation is that the huts refer to the clouds of glory. The verse describes it, and the Medrash describes that when the Jewish people left Egypt, they were surrounded with the clouds of glory. The clouds, God sent clouds to protect them in the desert. So essentially, we're sitting in the sukkah to commemorate the cloud, to commemorate the shelter that we had in the desert, which was really a cloud. So the Kabbalah say, so essentially we're sitting in a cloud. What cloud are we sitting in? We're sitting in the cloud produced by the high priest during his service on Yom Kippur, right? Again, what's Yom Kippur? The high priest goes into the Holy of Holies, produces a cloud of smoke. Torah uses the word anan, cloud of smoke. What happens with that cloud of smoke? So 4 days later, we build a sukkah, we build a hut, we build something that commemorates this protection of this cloud. We sit inside that cloud, and what we try to do is we try to make that shelter, that shade, part of our everyday life. That's why we sit there for 7 days, and we eat, and we drink, and we're supposed to live there the way we live in our house, right? What does that mean? It means that essential part of our soul that's expressed through the cloud, because remember, the cloud is really the cloud of Yom Kippur, that becomes our house. That becomes the environment in which we live our life. So that's the big idea. Now we want to start getting more specific. So there's one of the essential laws of the sukkah is that a sukkah has to have cloud, has to have shade, but it also has to, you have to have some sun. You're actually supposed to be able to see the clouds. So there can be some sun. You walk into the sukkah, it's not completely dark. It's shady. But when it's shady, you also have the concept of the sun. You have some sunlight and some shade. It's like a mix. Now, one of the earliest laws, the essential laws of sukkah, is written and codified in the Mishnah and Tractate Sukot. And the Mishnah says as follows: a sukkah cannot have, if a sukkah has more sun than shade, it's not kosher. For a sukkah to be kosher, it has to have more shade than sun. Okay, so we have to figure out what's the shade, what does the sun represent? Now, if sukkah is a reflection of Yom Kippur, so in reality, Yom Kippur also has to have the concept of sun and the concept of shade, and it has to have more shade than sun, right? Again, sukkah, what we're trying to achieve here is that the laws of sukkah are really reflections of things that exist earlier on Yom Kippur. So on sukkah, we know that there's sun and there's shade, because your sukkah does not have to be completely black. And the language of the Mishnah is that a sukkah has to have more sail, more shade than sun, but that's an implication that it has some sun as well. So on Yom Kippur, there also, if that's the case, if this Kabbalistic thesis is true, so on Yom Kippur we also have to have the concept of sun and shade. So where do you have the concept of sun and shade on Yom Kippur? So let's go back to Yom Kippur. Remember, I said that the unique service of Yom Kippur was that the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies and offer the incense that would create the smoke. So we know what the smoke is. The smoke is the incense, the Ktoret. By the way, the Ktoret was offered every day in the temple. But every day it was not offered in the Holy of Holies, it was offered in the Holy. In other words, not in the innermost chamber, but in the outer chamber. But on Yom Kippur, the service of the Ktoret was in the fullest because it was actually in the innermost chamber, in the Holy of Holies. Okay, so what about, where do you have sun or light on Yom Kippur? So the Kabbalists explain that refers to the offering of the service of the offerings. In other words, on Yom Kippur, they also had offerings, animal offerings, that they would offer on the altar. Why is the offering of the altar considered sun? What is offering an animal on the temple, a korban, an offering, why is that called sun? So the Kabbalists explain because an essential component of the offering is the fire. And fire represents heat. So heat is sun. The sun is a reflection of the heat. In other words, to try to summarize this, because I'm throwing a lot of details at you, on Yom Kippur, there's two essential ideas. There's two ideas. There's the idea of the offerings of the day, and then the incense of the day, the Ktoret of the day. Now we'll have to explain what that means in reality, what that means in our soul, because we also have to do this Sunday night. And if Mashiach doesn't come, or this Monday on Yom Kippur, Mashiach doesn't come and we don't have a temple, then we have to recreate the service of the offerings and the service of the incense within our own soul. So we have to do that before this class is over. But we have the concept of the offerings, and we have the concept of the incense. And the offerings is considered sun. Why is it sun? Because the offerings are offered on the fire. The Torah refers to the offerings as li'ishai, my fire offerings. The fire is a very important component, and we'll discuss that in a spiritual sense as well. In addition to the offering of the soul, in addition to the offering of the offerings, we also have the Ktoret, the incense. And the incense are called not sun, but shade. Why shade? Because it's a cloud. Why cloud? Because when they would put the incense on the coals, it would fill up the room with cloud. So we have the sun component, which is the offerings. We have the cloud component, which is the incense, which we'll get to in a minute and figure out what that is. But these concepts are reflected on Sukkot. What's a sukkah? A sukkah you're sitting outside, so you're getting some sun and you're getting some shade. But what has to be dominant on Sukkot? The shade has to be dominant. It has to have a majority of the shade and a minority of sun. Why is that? Because Sukkot is just an expression of Yom Kippur. And on Yom Kippur, even though we have both ideas, the component of the offering, which is fire, and the component of the cloud, which is the incense, but the incense is more essential to the concept of Yom Kippur. So now we have the pieces of the puzzle together. Now we just have to define what exactly is happening here. What does it mean? Fire. What is fire? What are the offerings? What is the incense? And like I said, this is true not only in the physical sense, but it's also true in the soul of every person, that we too on Yom Kippur have to offer the offering and the incense. We have to figure out what is offering, what is incense, and here we go. So what is an offering? An offering is, again, this is literally a 1,000 piece puzzle. There's a lot of pieces here, and I'm not giving all the details because I don't want to confuse. But everything here fits like a glove. So it's actually very interesting. Everything fits. What are the offerings? The offerings are korbanot. What do we know? Korban comes from the word becoming close. I want to become close to God. Now, if I say I want to become close to God, what does that mean? It means that I'm distant from God. In other words, in my consciousness, in my psyche, the way I feel, I don't feel close to God. I feel like a person separate, independent, who wants to come close to God. Okay, that's one idea. The korban is someone who's distant and wants to come close. The offering represents someone who's distant and wants to become close. What is the word ketoret? The word ketoret, the incense, the word ketoret literally means tied. In Hebrew, it's kesher, kuf shin resh, but in Aramaic, the shin and the tes can switch, and they're sister languages, so the shin and the tes are related. So katar, kuf tes resh, is the root of ketoret. Could also means kesher, means a bond. So the service of the ketoret represents the service of feeling that I am one with God. We're connected, we're one essence. As opposed to the service of the offering means I am distant and I want to become close. And therefore, when you offer the offerings, you need the most important component. We have been referring to them as fire, right? We said that offerings is the fire. Why are they fire? Because they're offered on the fire. But it's not just a technicality. The reason why we refer to them as fire is because the offerings, if you want to become close to God, what does that mean? You sense the sense of love. You have a yearning, a love, a passion to come close to God. Now, passion is wonderful, but passion means that I sense myself. Right? We always talk about this concept that the paradox of love, now the paradox, the irony of love is I love you. But if I love you, first of all, that means that me and you are different. I feel myself. And more importantly, I feel myself. If I feel myself, that means we didn't come to the point of intimacy when we're actually become one. Because if I feel myself, then I don't feel you. So the korban, the becoming close to God, is the offering that we offer every day of the year, including Yom Kippur, is having that passionate relationship with God. Passionate relationship with God means a love and a bond that comes through meditation. I understand that I want to connect to God, and I understand that the best thing is to connect to God, and that meditation creates a passion, and that passion moves me toward God. Now I'm closer to God. That's wonderful. That's fire. Fire represents passion, but passion is not Yom Kippur, because what did I say? Now, by the way, passion, if I talk about this passion is a fire. It goes up and down. Some days I feel it less. Some days I feel it more. Some days my passion is not directed to God. Some days my passion is directed to things that are destructive. But Yom Kippur is about recreating that passionate relationship with God. In other words, the offering. The offering is about recreating the passionate relationship with God. The Ketoret, the incense, is not about passion. It's about cloud. There's no fire here. There's no passion here. Why there's no passion? Because I don't feel myself. What do I feel? I feel the other person. I feel the bond with the other person. If I feel the other person, in this case, if I feel God, I'm not feeling myself. So the passion does not exist. The passion is not here. So there's no fire. right? It's all just coals. Coals, you don't see the fire, you don't see the flame. You don't see the passion, you don't see the flames going up and down, drawing all the attention to themselves, right? There's heat, but the heat is concealed. I don't feel myself. I exist, but I don't feel myself. What do I feel? I feel the ketoret. Again, the ketoret is in the word kesher, a bond. I feel one with God. And now this is what we're saying. We're saying both on Yom Kippur and Sukot, you have both types of a relationship. You have your conscious mind, which is going to feel separate, because your conscious mind, you feel you're a creation, you're independent, you're different, you're not God, you're a person, you have your own desires, your own perspective, but that's only your conscious mind. And the service of the conscious mind is to create a passion to God. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what a korban is. But in addition to that, on Yom Kippur, creating a passion of love to God is not the most important part of the day. In fact, the most important part of the day is to lose the sense of self, to touch the part of self that does not feel as an independent existence, to touch the part of self, the essence of the soul that feels one with God, the yechida. They call it the yechida, the singular. It's in the feminine, yechida, because we are the feminine half of the masculine half. God is the masculine half, we're the feminine half, and together we're one entity. So when I tap into that part of myself, there's no fire, I don't feel myself. What do I feel? I just feel one with God. Now on Yom Kippur, of those two, we have to do a little bit of both. We also have to create a passion of love to God to re-channel our passion toward God. So it shouldn't lead us to destructive ways. That's an important part of Yom Kippur, but it's not the main part. The main part, what was unique about Yom Kippur, is the entering of the Holy of Holies, when the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies. And when we enter the Holy of Holies within our own soul, we'll go into the innermost chamber. What's happening in the innermost chamber? In the innermost chamber, we are touching the essence of we're touching the essence of the self, and the essence of the self is one that does not feel the self. It just feels the self as one with God. And that's the Ketoret, and that's the incense. And this idea is reflected in the Sukkah. In the Sukkah, we also have the sun, which represents the passion and love to God. We also have the shade, which represents the cloud of the incense. The cloud of the incense, I don't see myself. I don't see the passion. It's not about me. It's about the presence of God. The cloud represents the presence of God. That's why when you read about Sinai, what do you hear? You hear there was a great cloud that rested on the mountain. Why the presence of God is linked to a cloud is interesting. The reason is that in the Kabbalah, sometimes you read about God, you read about Or and stuff, the infinite light of Hashem. The metaphor for God is light. But the metaphor of light breaks down, because light means that I could comprehend the light. What happens if there's something that's too powerful for me to comprehend? If I cannot comprehend it, it cannot be considered light. And that's why we say when the essence of God appears, there's no light, there's darkness, there's cloud, because it's too great for me to understand. It's too great for us to perceive. So that's why the essence of God is actually cloud. So when I say that we're sitting in the sukkah under the schach, under the shade, trying to and commemorating the cloud of God, the cloud means the part where I don't sense myself, I only sense God. And again, on Sukkot, like on Yom Kippur, you have both, which means creating a passion for God. That's one component of the day. The other component of the day, the essential component of the day, is not feeling self, touching the part of self that does not feel independent, that feels one with God. And that's the cloud. And when you project those onto Sukkot, that's the element of the sun and the element of the shade that are both existent in the sukkah. But the sukkah has to have more shade than sun. Just like on Yom Kippur, the essential component is not the love to God, not the passion to God, because that's the conscious mind. And then Yom Kippur, we're touching a deeper place. We're touching the part of God, part of self that's one with God, doesn't feel separate, that has to feel passion to connect to God. It's one with God to begin with. That's just one more point, and then we call it a day. What's interesting about the Yom Kippur, about the incense, is very interesting. First of all, okay, we don't have time to do everything. There's 11 species in the mixture of the incense. So without getting into it right now, Kedusha, holiness, is 10, and unholiness, the Klipa, is called 11. Why that is? It's a little counterintuitive. You would say 11 is a higher level than 10. No, there are 10 attributes of every creation, and then there's the divine energy. In the realm of the holiness, the divine energy becomes one with the creation. That's the definition of holiness. Definition of holiness is that the creation is a conduit, is a vessel for the divine holiness that's within it. So they merge, they become one, because the creation expresses the soul that's within it. So that's what it's 10. If something is unholy, it's 11. Why is it 11? Because you have to count the divine energy as separate, because the divine energy is not assimilated. It doesn't become one with the creation. It's separate and apart. So it's 11. So in short, the incense have 11 species, which represent unholiness. And also some of the ingredients were from non-kosher animals, which is surprising, because the rule about all the offerings is that all the offerings must come from kosher animals only. And here the incense, which we're saying is actually a higher level than the offering, first of all, it's in the number 11, which represents unholiness. And number 2, it has ingredients that are not kosher. So how does this work out? So the Kabbalah explains, because if you touch that deeper part of self, where you're one with God, that has the power to transform the negative experiences that you experience throughout the year and transform it to positive. We discussed this in the past. The idea of Teshuva is not just that we are atoned for the negative experience, but we learn to transform the negative experience to positive. So we discussed this, that if I sinned against God and I am in a distant place and I'm hurting and I'm in pain, that pain could actually be fuel for transformation. That pain could be fuel to bring me closer to God. So in other words, the true idea of Teshuva is correcting and transforming the sins, the negative experience to positive experiences. Now, what can do that? The offering can't do that. The offering has to come from, if you're becoming close to God, you have to come close to God with positive experiences. So the offering only comes from kosher animals, because you can only come close to God with positive experiences. But if you touch the essence of your soul, if you touch the level of Yom Kippur, and if you talk about the incense, where you don't feel yourself as separate and apart, but you feel yourself, you feel the part of self that's one and bound up with God, that part of the soul is so powerful that it can also transform the negative experience. And that's why the ketoret, the incense, has no problem. It's made of things that represent unholiness, because it has the power to transform unholiness. So that's it for today. 45, stopped exactly on time. I'll take maybe 60 seconds to try to summarize, because there's been a lot of details. And if after that, if anybody wants to make any comments, please go ahead. So I guess the summary is the idea, what is Yom Kippur and how is Yom Kippur reflected in Sukot? So Yom Kippur is not about fasting. It's not about praying. It's not about repenting, even that all those are necessary to get to the essence of Yom Kippur. But what is the essence of Yom Kippur? The essence of Yom Kippur is touching the subconscious part of self that is one with God. In the language of the Kabbalah, it's the revelation and accessing the 5th level, the level of Yechida, which means singular, which means it's one with the single God. So that's what Yom Kippur is. I touch my essence. And my essence, when I touch my essence, I don't really feel myself. What do I feel? I feel the part of me that's just one with God. And I don't feel the self, I feel God. Okay, that's Yom Kippur. That's why Yom Kippur, in addition to the offerings, which represent fire and passion, there's also the service of the Ketoret. The high priest goes into the Holy of Holies, the deepest part of the soul, and offers the Ketoret. The Ketoret means I'm bound up with God. I don't even have to feel myself. I feel the other. I don't feel my own passion. I feel the existence of the other. I feel the cloud, which represents God's presence. That's what Yom Kippur is. Once we achieve that level of awareness, once we access that part of the subconscious soul, now we want to make that part of the soul more part of our life. So God says, for 7 days, live in that environment. Live in that environment of the cloud. The cloud is the awareness of God. Not the awareness of God as I love God, but the awareness of God. God exists, and God is the only thing that's present, and we're just an extension of God. We're bound up in God, so to speak. Now on Sukkot also, because it's a reflection of, and that creates a great celebration, because now we are celebrating that awareness. Now, just like Yom Kippur has the 2 components of the offering and the incense, Sukkot also has the component of the sun, which represents passionate love to God, which represents I'm separate and apart, but I'm directing my love to God. And it also has the idea of the shade. And because Sukkot is a reflection of Yom Kippur, therefore, the dominant feeling has to be not the passionate love to God, but the essential connection to God. And that's why the shade has to be more shade than sun. So ladies and gentlemen, this has been the story in short. I hope this gives a little bit of insight into Yom Kippur and Sukkot. The main thing is we should tap into that part of the soul on Yom Kippur and then move on to celebrate that part of the soul and internalize that part of the soul throughout the holiday of Sukkot and Simchat Torah. So